A few more people come in, but we'll just slip them in the back here. Thank you for attending this evening. For those of you that this is the first time in our building, I'm Kathy Jack, and I'm the president of the Grove City Area Historical Society and Museum. And since this is your first time, I highly recommend after the program, if you'd like to look around a little bit. We've got 3 floors of artifacts and displays. We have a lot of volunteers here. They'll be happy to give you a little short tour, just take a look, and then hopefully you'll want to come back and spend more time here because there's a lot to see. As you're leaving this evening, you're welcome to take a copy of our newsletter. You can learn a little bit more about it. It's out on the counter there. And also beside that is a donation box. We don't charge anything for our museums or our programs, but we are a nonprofit organization, and we rely completely on donations and memberships. So if you could see that you can help us out a little bit, it would be greatly appreciated. There's no pressure at all, but we always are very happy to accept donations. So with that being said, I just want to tell you a little bit about our speaker tonight. Peggy Fisher was born in Pittsburgh and grew up in Pitcairn. And in 1976, she and her husband Mike moved to Grove City, where they raised their 2 sons, Ryan and Todd, and their niece, Darlene. And for the past 20 years, Peggy and Mike have operated their own business. A lot of you probably maybe have used her or know of their business. It's Pictures by Peggy. By making memories of photographies. They have photographed over 400 weddings, and also have provided pictures for sports, family, and high school seniors, for their senior pictures. Peggy has also been very active in community and church organizations, including the JCs. That's where my husband Tom and I met Peggy and Mike many years ago, and we became friends with them. And with that being said, I'll now turn the program over to Peggy.
Okay, it's been a little while with this pandemic here that I'm giving a speech, so bear with me, okay? It's so good to see so many smiling faces and people that I know. This makes it even better, because a lot of times I go to these other places and it's like I don't know anybody. I don't have to live up to anything. So anyway, bear with me as I go through this. Thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it. First of all, I'd like to say, is there anybody here who knows of anybody who has been in the military? Raise your hand. I figured that. Are there any present or former military vets here? Thank you for your service. And the other thing is, any Vietnam vets? No Vietnam vets. I say that because all of us know that the Vietnam vets weren't taken care of. And I always tell them, welcome home, because they were treated in this terrible, terrible. So, I wrote a book. It's called, well, this one doesn't even show the name, so I better, it's called Daddy Came Home. And the reason I wrote this book, back 5-6 years ago, I went to see the movie down here at the Guthrie called Unbroken, the movie Unbroken. Now, all my life, I listened to the stories about my dad, who was in the Bataan Death March, and he was a prisoner of war for 3.5 years. I listened to the stories, but to be in the movie theater, sitting there and looking at the big screen, it paralleled a lot of what my dad went through, and it truly ripped my heart out. And I remember Eric Thomas was there at the end. I was the last one out of the theater because I just sobbed, because so many things were similar to what my dad went through. So I came away from that and I said to Mike, I have all this stuff about my dad. I need to do something with it, because once I'm gone, this real history is gone. So, not that I consider myself an author by no means, but I put together a lot of the information that my family had handed down to me through the years. This book means nothing just coming from me. But when my dad came back after being away, he had an interview with the newspaper, and I have that interview. So in the middle of all this, in the italicized spots in here, it's my dad's own words. So this is real history. And as we all know, it's tough getting real history nowadays. So that's the reason I did this from the very beginning, because I never would have considered myself ever doing it. But I really feel, without a doubt, that it was divine intervention for this, for several reasons. But one in particular is this picture that's on this, the front, that's a picture of my dad and I, back when I was just a little tiny girl. I'd never seen this picture, never. I started typing on the computer the stuff, what I was going to say and everything, and my cousin, who had passed away like a few months before, she had sent me a box of stuff, and I was going through it. In there were those little Kodak little picture books, and I'm just going through it, and there was this picture.
Oh, come on.
It really, I really feel that I was led to do this, and it wasn't my intention.
It's the one that showed both your faces.
It was the only picture I have that showed both my dad and my faces, you know. I have a picture when I got baptized that he had me over his shoulder, or I don't know. So that picture means the world to me, and it's now on the cover. I called the book Daddy Came Home because if Daddy didn't come home, I wouldn't be here to talk about it. That's why I called it Daddy Came Home. So let me give you a little bit of information about my dad. He was born in 1916. He was born in Pitcairn, which is near Monroeville, and he had a normal upbringing. Mother and dad supported, loved, everything was a natural upbringing. He went to high school, he graduated in 1935, and my mom and he were high school sweethearts. And after he graduated, he went to work in a machine shop. Well, then there was time for the draft notice stuff came in, and my great uncle was a lieutenant colonel and all this in the military, and he guided my dad as to which way to be going. So he thought was the correct way, the best way. So he decided that he should go to the Army Air Corps. Now the Army Air Corps is, that's what the Air Force ended up being. It started out being the Army Air Corps, went into that. He had boot camp down at Fort Meade, Maryland for engineering. So my mom and dad, knowing he was going to be leaving, they ran away like a lot of other people there. They ran away to Winchester, Virginia. Now I want to go back and say something I was going to say at the beginning here. When I was saying about the military, every military person who signed on that dotted line has their own personal story. This just happens to be my dad's story, and I'm the one who just happened to put this all together for my dad. And anybody that has military people, you could do the same thing, what I just did. I have sold over close to 1,000 books, given many presentations. It's been 5.5 years now. So anyway, my mom and dad ran off to Winchester, Virginia. And I always hear the song, Winchester, dun, dun, dun. And I think, what were they doing when they were driving to Winchester? So anyway, they were married on May 31st, 1941, and they were married in a Lutheran pastor's parsonage. 3 days later, my dad left for boot camp. So after boot camp, he came home and he had to leave. So they were together and everything, and he was to leave October of 1941. So they got married in May, and he was to leave in October to go to Clark Air Force Base in the Philippines. And he went with the 803rd Engineer Aviation. Now, when he flew out, this is the thing I have to tell people. They didn't know at this time that my mom was pregnant. So my dad's flying out to the Philippines, and my mom's pregnant, nobody knows that she didn't even know she was pregnant. Okay, so he got overseas, he was in the 803rd Engineers, and what their main idea there was to work on bridges, roads, and airfields. And everything was cool, they were doing their thing for that couple months, until the fateful day, December 7th, 1941, which we all know what happened. And then everything broke loose. And then he was on combat duty. So the Japanese started bombing Bataan for several months, And then the soldiers started lacking food, medicine, and equipment, and they had a hard time keeping up. Now, I know you're a social studies teacher. Will you disagree with me if I say, you know, General MacArthur was there. General MacArthur saw that they were lacking all these things, and he left them, and he said, I will return. And what happened? He didn't come back.
No.
Till much.
Very, very end, yeah, there were
Thank
a
you.
lot of stuff happening.
Thank you.
Just to interject before I forget.
Yes.
Yeah.
My dad was in the military too, I was just talking to my buddy here, his dad was too, but my dad, one of the biggest regrets I've ever had is never asked him what he did here. But the one thing he did say is, yeah, he said, I saw MacArthur come ashore. Whether he did or not, I remember him saying that,
I
and he
think
also
he
got
did,
married.
but I think it was after the fact.
He was real like, yeah.
He left the guys.
He left the guys, yeah.
He left.
Well, anyway, my parents got married in Winchester, Virginia too, that must have been.
His
He said that, I thought, yeah, they must have been the same place. Maybe they were together riding a car. I remember they were in Winchester.
That could be. Okay, so these poor guys were stuck on the Philippines, and they were lacking food, lacking medical supplies, lacking everything, and like we said, MacArthur just beat feet.
Right.
Was in a bad way. So the surrender on Bataan came on April the 10th, 1942, by General Edward King. Now, if you want to figure this out, that was 80 years ago, just about a month ago. So this is a big deal for me. 80 years ago is when all this happened. Okay, now, General Edward King was never supposed to surrender. It was a no-no. You don't surrender. But this is what he said, and I quote, "If I do not surrender all forces to the Japanese today, Bataan will be known around the world as the greatest slaughter of history." So because of the soldiers, he surrendered. So there were 75,000 soldiers, mainly the Filipino, and 15,000 Americans started on the walk to Camp O'Donnell, which was approximately 85 miles. So this was given to me by somebody who was with my dad as a POW. And it really points out, down here is where they were. Camp O'Donnell is up here.
Just
Yeah,
above
camp
the
right
line,
here.
yeah.
So they had to walk this trek the whole way up here, 85 miles. It was a bad situation there. But that was Bataan. A lot of people, and I got to say about the junior high, since you were junior high, I remember when Todd was in junior high, maybe it was your class, there was a list of different things they could make reports on. And I looked on there, Bataan Death March was on there. I said to Todd, you know what you're doing. Because a lot of people didn't know what the Bataan Death March was.
We would have covered that, and like that was the case, because we had to do reports.
Well, I thank you for that, because you wouldn't believe, even adults that don't know what it is.
Yeah, I just asked some of my buddies about your talk, a younger guy, I said, you know what that is, right? He said, no, and he's 29, I thought, oh my God.
That's it. They probably aren't doing history like when you were a teacher. Okay, so anyway, they start on this trek for 85 miles up there. And in my dad's own words, from the newspaper article that he did, he said for the first 5 days they had no water or food. On the 5th day, they handed him a handful of wormy rice. This is the thing that tripped me with the first Unbroken or the second Unbroken, I don't know which one it was, but they went over that. Oh, it must have been the second one, because the guy was hallucinating and remembering all these things, and it showed a Japanese soldier forcing him to eat wormy rice. I mean, I just can't even begin to think about it. And I often wondered, in my home, we never had rice. I didn't know about rice probably till I met Mike. What's his called?
I corrupted her.
So anyway, when it began, I think it must have been the 5th or 6th day, they needed truck drivers. So they pulled my dad out to be a truck driver to go up and down the mountain. he went up and down the mountain and he saw what was going on in the Death March, because the guys were pushed to their limit. They were bayoneted if they didn't stand up. If they stopped, they were killed. It was a tragedy. But about the 5th or 6th day, my dad, when he was doing the truck thing, he escaped. That's the happiest thing I'm going to tell you today. No, not really. I'll have some other things. But there was a little Filipino boy who had a cart. And in my dad's words, he told me all this. They put my dad in his cart and they wheeled him clear to the San Fernando Hospital, which is clear over here. I'm not sure where he was on this trek, but there's the San Fernando Hospital there, that the little Filipino boy took him over there.
Covered in straw.
And had my dad there, they had my dad there for, I think it was 4 months. And the Japanese would come in and they would check out the hospital. And what the Filipino people did, my dad was just a little guy, and what they did, they wheeled my dad into the delivery room and they pretended he was a woman having a baby. And that worked for like 4 months. And they protected him. They protected him all that time. Now, I have to add this. My oldest son, Ryan, lives in Maui. So we've been to Hawaii several times. You run into Filipino people many times there. And my family think I'm nuts, because from the very beginning that I went there, I'd see a Filipino and I'd go over and I'd say, "Are you Filipino?" And they'd say, "Yes." "I love your heritage. I love the Filipino people." And stupid me, I would get in my purse and give them a $5 bill or something like that. I said, "Thank you very much." Because if it wasn't for that Filipino boy and the people at the hospital, my dad would have never made it home. So I do this all the time. I've even had another friend be with me with someplace, and I said, "Are you Filipino?" And she's, "Oh." But I'm just so grateful in that respect. Okay, so then after my dad had been at the hospital for about 4 months, the Japanese made a surprise visit, and my dad was out on the gurney, and they got him, and the Filipino people came over and said, "No, no, no, he's Filipino, he's Filipino," until they found his dog tags. Then they realized he was American. They took him, and this is where it gets a little crazy. There are several books out, and Mike has read all of them, and several of the books from this Captain Locke, who was with my dad, he names my dad being there with him. So we know for a fact that the Japs took my dad, put him on a hell ship. The hell ship was Rukukuku Maru or something like that. It was one of the hell ships that survived. Several of them got bombed, and the Americans didn't know these were POWs on the ship, and it was a bad situation. But my dad was on this hell ship. It was a freighter, and he was down in the coal bin, and they said they usually have 50 people down there, and they had 200. So it must have been terrible. So he left October 13th, 1942 on the hell ship, and they headed to Kobe, Japan. Kobe, Japan. Now, this is another thing I want you to know. Japanese regulation manuals states this, quote, "A POW should be treated with a spirit of goodwill and should never be subjected to cruelties or humiliation," unquote. Well, we know they didn't listen to that, did they? Okay, so life as a POW, like I said, he was in Kobe, Japan. Kobe, Japan was the largest seaport there, and he worked on the docks for 41 months. He lived in an unheated warehouse. How I know this a lot is from Captain Locke, who came down from New Hampshire to meet me here in Grove City, because he wanted to meet me. Oh, delightful man. He's no longer with us, but he gave me a lot of these things, which I'll try to show you real quick. But he told me they were in an unheated warehouse. 200 of the original 500 there died. So it was rough going. Rations were 2 bowls of rice daily. My dad lost 50 pounds. He was 85 pounds when he arrived home. They slept on planks that were 4 inches from the ground with blankets made of straw and rice that they could put up and see through. And they had some rough winters over there too. He was not allowed to be happy. He was not allowed to sing. He was not allowed to smile or do anything. If he did, they beat him. He had to salute all the Japanese soldiers, not just the officers, every one of them. If they didn't, he got beat. And they got beaten regularly with clubs, hands, belts, or whatever they could get their hands on. One of the things they did, and I don't know if you've ever seen this when you've looked at some of these, they took the guys' thumbs and hooked them up on something so that their feet didn't touch the ground. If they moved at all, they got beat again too. It's just not nice. Not nice. Okay, so, and this is what the Japanese told the guys, the POWs, quote, "The Japanese brought them back to life through the great heart of the emperor. They should have died because they killed Japanese husbands, sons, brothers, and sweethearts, and now they must suffer." Doesn't sound like they agreed to their regulations, huh? It was terrible, terrible. Okay, so that was happening overseas. So I'm going to tell you what happened back home. And my mother shared a lot of this with me too. But back home, they had no clue about the Bataan Death March. It just wasn't, they didn't know anything about it. They kept it quiet. Now, as far as my mother and my family knew, my dad was missing in action. They didn't know whether he was dead or alive. They just knew that he was missing in action. Now, my brother, I told you my mom was pregnant at the beginning. My brother was born May 21st, 1942, when my dad was MIA. I can't even imagine having a baby not knowing if your husband was dead or alive. My mother always told me this. She said, when your brother came out, he had yellow jaundice. And she said, I looked at him and I said, just because your dad's fighting the Japs, you don't have to look like one. I have to be careful when I say that. Okay, so my dad was MIA. My family didn't know if he was alive or dead or whatever until, let me share this with you. Here's a Life magazine dated February 7th, 1944. And when I found this, boy, I felt I was really blessed. Because in this Life magazine is this picture. And my family got this picture. Right there is my dad.
Oh, wow.
So they knew, at least they had some hope that he possibly could be alive through all of this.
They had their guns up.
They had their guns, so that was probably before they were taken prisoner. But thanks to this Life magazine, and let me tell you about Life magazines nowadays. To get a full Life magazine, complete with everything, is very difficult. Because people cut out the ads, and they get more money for the ads than they do the whole magazine. That makes no sense at all to me. But anyway. So I'm pleased that we had that Life magazine, and my family had the Life magazine to know.
It's up there. It's on the
What did I
medals.
do?
It's on the medals.
See? Don't even know what I'm doing here. Okay. Okay, the other thing I want to show here, and this came from Captain Locke too.
Now, he was a master sergeant. at
Yeah,
the
he was
time.
not a captain. I knew him as a captain years later, but he was a master sergeant when my dad knew him. So he brought this down from New Hampshire for me to have. I think this is a very unique picture. This is an actual U.S. Air Force picture, but it's taken from the plane as they are dropping the bombs down. Now, if you see this little red dot right there, Captain Locke is the one who told me that's where their warehouse was. And the Americans did not know that the POWs were there, so they were bombing and bombing. And what the Japanese would do, he told me, they'd make all the POWs come out, lay on the ground, and look up as the bombs were dropping. Cruel. Cruel. Now, not too far from Kobe, I think it's Hiroshima. It's either Hiroshima or Nagasaki, I forget which one. But the bomb dropped there. And of course, nobody knew what was going on. And Captain Locke said all the POWs and Japanese people came out and they saw the funnel cloud. And they watched as this funnel cloud came over. And he told me, when it came on top of them, he said they held their hands out and they could see through their hands. So back when Captain Locke came, I was probably in my 40s at that time or something like that. He said, Peggy, I want to tell you something. He says, I think you need to go to the VA and be checked. I said, what are you talking about? He said, well, what we're finding is the offspring from anybody who their fathers were there, they were developing cancer because, you know, of the radiation and all that. So he said, you better go do that. He said, usually in their 40s or 50s they get cancer. Thank God, that never came my way. But he said to me, and this is what gets me to this day, he says, hey, I got to tell you something else too. It can skip generations. Now I have 2 sons and I have 2 granddaughters. But they did tell me that once it passes, it weakens. So my 2 sons, I mean, Ryan is now he's 47, Todd's 40. You know, let's get them out of their 40s and I'll feel better with that. Then I have 2 granddaughters, 8 and 10. But, you know, here we are, how many years? 80 years later, and it still is heavy on my heart that I pray that nothing like that would ever surface. Now, after everything happened and the bombs from the United States came, the Americans were definitely having the upper hand of the war. And on the docks, the guys also were with Koreans and English people and everything, and they knew from their newspapers that the war was going to be coming to an end, and they would share them that. And in my dad's own words, he said, when we heard that, we went back to the Japanese and we said, hey, it's not going to be long. They're coming to get you, and if they find you with a gun or anything like that, you're going to be not here anymore. And so the Japanese put their guns down and left. And when the soldiers came in to get them, they were in good shape. They were not good shape.
Except for the ones that were the cruelest. They didn't seem to make it out of camp.
Yeah,
Some
the
of the books
cruelest,
I read.
yeah, that's what my dad had said too. We dealt with a few of the rough Japs and did that. Okay, so the war ends. My dad came home. He spent 11 months and 26 days in the continental United States and 4 years, 13 days on the foreign soil. Now, just like every other war that we're in, you come back from the war and you have to be normal. You have to be normal. I think it's so tough. No wonder we have so much PTSD and all that. How can you, after going through and witnessing what you've witnessed and people dying in front of you and all this, how can you come back and try to be normal? Well, my dad handled it. He was the fire department president. He drove the ambulance. He was in the Eagles, the American Legion, and he worked in the post office with a delivery truck. He loved playing cards and he loved beer. So he went on his normal life, you know, and he had a son. You know, he didn't have a son when he left, and now he has a son. And my brother was 6 years old, I think, at that time. Or, you know, he was 3 and a half. That's right. I want to show you this picture. Okay. When my dad came home, in the Post-Gazette was this picture. And this is the first time my dad saw my brother. My brother was 3 and a half years old here. And of course, this is my mom. This was in the Post-Gazette. I love this picture. I just loved, you know, because after what he went through, he's still kissing his son. Okay. So they go on their merry life and be as normal as possible. But their biggest excitement for the day, for the years, happened on May 7th, 1949, when I was born. In case you don't know, my birthday was 2 or 3 days ago, and I'm 73 years old. Anyway, when my dad was gone, my mom picked my brother's name, which is Earl Douglas. Earl from my dad, and Douglas because of Douglas MacArthur. I don't understand
That's
that.
before you left.
Yeah, and we used to vacation down at Colonial Beach. Our family used to go down to Colonial Beach, Virginia. And I have a picture, and it's in the book. I'm just a little squirt, but I could never understand why we're down there hot and everything, and my dad never took his shirt off. And I didn't realize until my mom told me that the undertaker, when my dad did die, said he had the most brutalized body that he had ever witnessed. So he had the, whatever.
Scars from working.
Yeah,
Keep my last step.
Yeah. So, and then the terrible, terrible worst time was October the 6th, 1956, and that's when my dad died. He was going along, being fine. He took me up to my grandparents to stay overnight on a Friday night, and I thought everything was fine. I was 7 years old at the time, but I remember being at my grandma and pop-ups, and I was upstairs, and in the middle of the night there was all this commotion. So you figure I'm 7 years old here. So I go to the edge, and I ran down the steps, and they shooed me back upstairs, and I'm up there, but I'm listening. What's going on down there? And they said, Earl died. They were talking. Now, in my 7-year-old mind, I'm sitting there, if I had a choice, which one would I pick? Because my brother's name was Earl too. And I figured out, my brother, if I had to choose, it would be, because my brother didn't like me because he had 7 years of everything, and then I came along and, you know, he did start to like me after a while. He's no longer with us. But anyway, I can remember my papa bringing me down the steps. Never underestimate a 7-year-old. Never underestimate a 7. I can remember my papa bringing me down the steps, sitting me on his lap. And I can't imagine what he must have been going through. Sat me on his lap, and of course we were Christians, and he said to me, your daddy went to heaven. And thankfully I knew what that meant. And I was supposed to get some comfort in that, but I knew my dad was not going to be around anymore. I also know that my dad, and I can remember this, had a full military funeral with the taps and the guns and all this and that. And to this day, I have trouble with those taps, as I'm sure you all do too. But I can remember as a 7-year-old, dressed really cute and all this and that, but hearing these guns, and it was not fun. So, it was a tough life, not having a dad. I ended up having a stepfather. He never liked my brother because he reminded me of my dad. It reminded him of my dad. He put up with me. It just wasn't the same, and I really miss having a dad. One of the hardest things I ever had to do, Kathy had said we had a photography business. We would do a wedding, and it would be time for the father-daughter dance. So Mike would be on one side, and I'd be on the other. Okay, we're going to do this. And then, you know the emotion that comes with a father-daughter dance. Several times I had to say to Mike, I can't do this, and leave, because it was rough. We're almost done here. We're almost done. Okay. So fast forward here to 1993. Okay, before I even get to that, let me tell you this. When my dad died, they said what happened, he could have had 100 doctors around him, His heart just blew out. And they say a lot of that came from him being a prisoner of war, and also beriberi, which breaks down the tissues around the heart, which causes heart problems. The night that he died, he had the indigestion, and they walked over in the middle of the night to the doctor's office, and the doctor gave him an EKG, and they said he was fine. He got home, went to bed. My mother was in the bathroom changing her clothes, and she heard the gurgle. and she ran out and found that my dad had died there.
Oh.
So the American Legion was very good to my mother, and they said, we believe this was a service-related death, and we need to send the information in, because at that time I was 7, my brother was 14. In fact, this is the very last picture I have. Excuse me. My brother is 14, I'm 7 years old, and believe it or not, 2 weeks after this, my dad died. I remember my grandmother wanting to take this picture. Nah, my dad didn't want, she made him do this. And I'm so thankful. You can see a cigarette there. So anyway, the Legion said, let's get this information together and let's send it in. So my mother did it. It passed in Pittsburgh. It passed in Harrisburg. It went to DC and they threw it out. So if my mother would have gotten that, it would have entitled my brother and I to go to school, more money, just additional things. We never did get anything like that. And that's fine. And my mother, anybody that knows me knows I don't have a college degree. And growing up, my mother always said, we don't have any money, don't even think about taking the college courses, don't even think about anything. You're going to be a secretary or something like that, which I ended up doing, which I'm grateful for. I'm not bragging on that. So anyway, fast forward to 1993, and this was during the Clinton administration, and it came down through the courts that anybody that had beriberi, they were proving that it caused a massive coronary and they would die. So they said, I think you need to open your mother's case. By this time I had brought my mother up here to Grove City and she lived up here at Fellowship Manor. And so I went to my mom, I said, hey Mom, you want to open up your case? No. I said, Mom, and this is the truth, we didn't want money. We didn't want anything like that. All we wanted was our government to say that my dad died from a result of being a prisoner of war and what he went through. So my mom said, okay, go ahead. So it was Phil English was the congressman. He got me the paperwork, we filled it, my mom filled it up. She signed it, and all those things are in the book too. And it went off. 2 weeks later, my mom died. My mom died. And I thought, this must also be a divine thing, you know? That God wants this to be talked about, be mentioned and everything. It took the government a year and a half to make a decision. So the letter came, and I'll never forget, I wasn't worrying about any of this because my mom had passed and I was just grieving the fact my mom was gone and I could care less about this thing. So I get this letter and I thought, okay, maybe we'll get something. Read the letter says, we're proud of your dad, he was a true hero, we're blah, 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 blah. And then on in the letter it said, I'm sorry, but the fact that your mother remarried, we can't open her case anymore. And I have that documented in the book there too. I was devastated. I thought the second time around, they're slapping us down. And honest to goodness, I didn't want money. That wasn't the, and anybody knows me, knows I'm a normal person, I could care less about money. So it was after that I thought, okay, I'm going to start getting my dad's medals because my mother had given my brother all the medals and they got destroyed and it was terrible. So, what?
Lost.
Yeah, lost. So I have his other medals, but the two that I really like, this is the Bronze Star here. And this one is a real unique one here if you want to look at this. This is the POW medal. Excuse me. It has an eagle with barbed wire around the outside. And on the other side has my dad's name on it. I cherish this. I really, truly cherish that. So I started doing that, and oh wow, where am I at now? Here. I'm getting here. Okay. So like I said, then I had seen the movie Unbroken, which ripped me up. And I thought at that time, that's when I'm gonna start doing this. So that was in 2015, and we got the book done, and I said to Mike, there is a museum in Wellsburg, West Virginia, that's called the Bataan and Corregidor Museum. I'm gonna take some books down there to give them the books down there. Excuse me. So I called down, talked to the curator, Jim. He said, yeah, Peggy, come on down, come on down. We took books down there and we talked to them. They have all these displays. If you ever have a chance, go down there. It's excellent, it's excellent. So he said to me, Peggy, I can't believe you're coming at this particular time. I said, why? He said for 20-some years, they've been contacting different companies who use the POWs as slave labor. And in 2 weeks, the Mitsubishi company was coming. They were donating $50,000 to the museum, and they were also offering an olive branch. So he said, Peggy, I really would like you to come. I said, I don't think I could do that. I don't think I could do that. He said, no, yes, you can do it. He says, just come. I said, okay, we'll come. So when I first got down there, I walked in and there was a 93-year-old man there. He came up and he introduced himself. I introduced myself. And he said, Peggy, I want to tell you something. What happened in the past is the past. We're moving on from now. Well, here's a former POW telling me this. It's like, slap me in the face, you better get it together, girl. Okay, I'll do it. So this is a picture of me sitting in the back while we listened to the CEO of Mitsubishi. He was there to apologize for what his predecessors had done. It was very moving. He couldn't speak a word of English, but they said what he was saying there. So then afterwards, we go into the museum itself, and there's a picture of me with this Japanese guy. Some people don't like this picture, but I gotta tell you, his attitude and the way he interacted with me softened my heart toward the Japanese. Because this man truly, truly was sorry for what his predecessors had done. He was so kind to me, so kind to me. And it means a lot that he talked to me and was nice to me. Okay. Okay. So at present, we had 2 bills before Congress for the soldiers on Bataan Death March to receive the Gold Medal of Honor. It never got out of committee. Never got out of committee. Now, I just recently sent information in, and the curator down there said, Peggy, don't do it, don't do it. But another congressman from New Mexico put a bill in to give the Filipino Medal of Honor. And so we were thinking, okay, this is just for the Filipino people. And so I contacted them. They said, no, you send all that form and verifying your dad was a POW on the Philippines, and we'll take it through. And I did that 2 weeks ago. Haven't heard anything back from them. But we'll see. I'm thinking positive. Then there's another positive thing. And of course this pandemic came at such the worst time. Right before the pandemic, I got contacted by somebody who had taken my books and given them out. His daughter was an actress in Hollywood and gave them out to different producers. He called me and he said, Peggy, there are 7 producers who are interested in making your book a movie. 3 were in New York and 4 were in Hollywood. But he said, first of all, they want to verify you're telling the truth. He said, how can you verify that you're telling the truth? I said, oh, that's good, that's good. Well, and this has been a couple of years that I did this. There were 3 elderly people in their mid-90s that were still in the hometown that I grew up in. So I called them up, I said, do you mind if I come interview you? Would you verify that what I'm saying in my book is the truth? They said yes. I went down there, I interviewed them, I have that with me. Of those 3, 2 of them have passed away already.
Wow.
So if the time ever comes, I'm ready. I'm ready. Okay. So in conclusion, war is hell for soldiers and their families. But everyone has a choice as to which path they want to choose. My brother had a very rough life. He's not here. He chose the path that everybody owed him and pitied him. That was just the way he chose to go. I decided I wanted to choose another path. I wanted to make my dad proud and to keep real history alive and to show about his accomplishments. My daddy will always be my hero. And I wrote my book. I sell the book for $10. No big deal, I'm just trying to get real history out there. I wrote the book to keep his legacy alive, to give people real history from his own words. Thank you all for coming.
I confess, I don't know about the Winchester marriages. And can you tell a little bit more about why
Yeah,
people
well,
went to Winchester?
I think in Pennsylvania you had to wait longer to get married. So if you went over the line to Virginia, you could get it done in three days or something.
All right.
There you go.
And I just
There
found
you
out.
go, dear.
I didn't know.
Thank you, Nick.
I don't know if you know this, I just found this out. Do you know why they started requiring blood tests for marriages? Nobody knows? Wait till you hear this. I couldn't believe it. Back in the 30s, they had an outbreak of syphilis, and they were trying to verify that, right, Pat? And when they realized they would get people's blood before they got married, and that's why they required the blood test. I don't know if it's required now.
No.
It's not required now?
But we did for a long time.
A long time.
Yeah.
Yep, yep.
Wow.
Yes.
Do you know what your dad was doing on the truck in the Philippines?
He was taking Japanese soldiers up to the top and back.
For what reason?
Because the Japanese soldiers had to, they wouldn't walk that walk. They needed to go up top.
Shifts, yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
trading
okay.
shifts and doing things like that.
And food.
Yeah, no, the bad guys walk with them. They're the ones with the bayonets, and they're the bad. Many thousands died on that trek. And they would just dig the hole and shove them in. It was terrible. Any other questions? No? Yes?
Did you know that there was another man here in Grove City that was on that Death
In Grove
March?
City, what is his name?
That's a good question. Larry, would you by any chance know who the missionaries were that went to Tower Church? He was a reverend, and they lived on, well, I know what house it was, I don't know the number, on Craig Street. And I never thought to go back in our church directory to see if his name was there.
I don't
But,
know.
yeah, he was very crippled.
Was he?
Uh-huh. I'll try to look that up. He's long gone now.
Now, in my hometown, there was another gentleman who went through the same thing. And when I wrote this book, I took the book down to his son. And I thought he'd be pleased. And he said, Peggy, you never should have done this. I said, why? He said, do you see how they're treating the Holocaust people when they say that they were questioning whether it was real or not? He says, I said, I'm sorry, what I have here is real, and I'm going to speak the truth as long as I can. And he said, shouldn't do it. 3 months later, he called me up, and he said, Peggy, thanks for writing it. So I was pleased about that. Any other questions? Yes?
Does the olive branch signify peace? Is that?
I think it's saying they feel sorry for what had happened and they're trying to make a good deed out of a bad situation.
I just thought it was interesting that it was an olive branch.
It was an olive branch. Anybody else say anything about olive branches?
Well, that's what we always heard, an olive branch was a gesture
Peace offering.
of peace
It's
offering.
always been a peace offering symbol, yeah.
Yeah, but they also put $50,000. And if you would see this museum, we were there before it, then after they did a wonderful job.
Where's that located again?
In Wellsburg, West Virginia. In fact, he just called me up and he said, Peggy, we're starting to have people come and talk. Would you come and talk? And he has a big picture. That picture that you saw that was in the Allied News and that, with me standing next to that, that was at the museum. He had that big picture of my dad there. So that's how that picture came about. Yeah. Any other questions? No? Okay. Yes. Oh, I love your questions.
I'm just trying to put things together. So after your dad passed away, did your mom ever talk to you as you grew up about different things that she knew about the experience your dad had?
My
or-
dad never talked about it
Okay.
except for that one interview. That's why it's so important. Like I said, this book means nothing, me writing it. My dad did not speak to my mother about it. Now, I think we're very blessed that my dad did not have the night sweats, did not have the horror and all that. At least I don't know he had that. And I've heard of a lot of people as they got older that experienced that, all these things start to surface again. And I know one person in particular, she lives in Harrisville. She says, Peggy, I'm glad you have a good thing about your dad because I don't. And I said, why? And she says, well, my dad lived while I was in my 30s, and there was another side of him that surfaced because he couldn't handle the PTSD and what all he went through. And so I said, I'm so thankful that I didn't see that, and I have the goodness about my dad still in my heart. But it could have been a lot different.
Yeah, because my dad came back, he was in Iwo Jima, and he was on the hill beside the flag when they were putting it up. And he never said a word. And me being a teenager, I just nagged him one day. We're in the car going to Boy Scout camp, and I just kept nagging him. And I said something, and I said, how many Japs did you shoot? And he goes, none. I said to him, did you never killed a Jap? He said, no, I never said that. He said, I probably cut 300 throats. He was the guy that crawled into the enemy campsites, set up the radio communications for the big guns to come in offshore. But he would never talk about it. He said, I'll never talk about it again, we're done. And I never heard another word, no matter how much I hounded him.
And that's another divine intervention. How does Mike and I come together as a couple, and our dad's having rough times in the military? His dad died when he was
41.
52. No, your dad was 52. My dad was 40.
Oh, that's right, yours was 41.
My dad was 40 when he died, and his was 51, or 52.
Just turned 252.
Yeah, and it was, we have a lot in common here.
Peggy, I was just wondering, going along that same line, we had Mary Jo Palmer here a few years ago and talked about her father's experience, Frank Breyer. He was on a ship that went down, and he had, I think why he didn't talk to it for as long as he felt guilty that he survived and the other ones didn't. And I think that's probably a common thread among a lot of them, that they just couldn't deal with talking about it because they felt that, you know, why were they spared when others died, you know, and I think
That
that's.
is probably very, very true. But, you know, so here we are 80 years later, and still talking about it.
Yeah.
And it's still an emotional thing for me because I never really had a dad, and it was an emptiness. And but I'm thankful. 73 years old. My dad died when I was 7, and I'm still able to talk about my dad. So many people said my dad's probably smiling big time, and he'll meet me at the gates being so proud. And that's what I had to go on. Yes.
I can't think of his name right now, but Unbroken.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Louis
Louis.
Zeffirelli.
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
And what he went through, this is about the same time with your dad, isn't it?
Exactly, that's
Well,
why I
they
did
show-
it.
Any connection?
Connections, I'm not connected anything like
But
that.
they showed him freaking out at a restaurant when he ordered potatoes and they brought him rice and he just was and threw the rice across the restaurant in the movie.
That's what prompted me to do this book, was that, because it was a powerful movie. Anybody that would watch that and know that it was bad. It was bad. And then the second one, Unbroken 2 or whatever, it was when he went back home and how the PTSD surfaced and he'd have all these things and you know, not a pleasant time. Do I forgive the Japanese people? That's what people said. How can you stand there with that Japanese person? It is not those Japanese that did this.
Yeah.
You
And
know,
even the ones that were back in the country, Japan, a lot of the, you know, just like in Russia now, I think of kept comparing to what the Ukrainians are going through. You know, there's a lot of those Russian people, I mean, they're just like you and I mean, they don't know what, and they have no connection to what's going on with their military, and it's,
that's right, and it's
In all the
military.
books I've read probably 7 or 8 books about, from different people that were there. And almost every book says the Japanese people were only one step above the slave labor. The Japanese people were treated just
they
as
were
bad.
treated the same way.
They
Yeah.
were treated very poorly,
This
so.
was probably why the little Filipino boy was kind too. He was, maybe their nationality was taught kindness also.
There you go, there you go. And that's why, even to this day, I don't care where I'm at with my husband or whoever, I'm gonna see that, like, okay, case in point, do you know Kelly, let's get Kelly
I know
Ford.
who you mean.
Kelly Ford, she was Kelly Ford, she's now Kelly.
Done.
Yes, I have met her mother-in-law and her husband, and I just love them. Because it was them, their heritage and their country that saved my dad, and I'm able to be here to talk about it. Any other questions? Thank you all so much. This
Thank you,
means a lot.
thank you. Such a heartfelt, heartwarming, you know, story you told us, and I'm sure a lot of us will go away and remember, you know, all that.
Well, I do have books here.
Yes, if anybody would like to read the whole story, you know, Peggy has her book.